Going on, NBA 2K fans? It's Pete Toll, aka PT Sports 84, bringing you another NBA 2K26 official roster video. Today is Thursday, January 8th, 2026. If you were hidden under a rock or just asleep until a few minutes ago, you may not have seen Trey Young has now been traded from the Atlanta Hawks, and he's now a Washington Wizard. It had been rumored for a while, at least for the past, 4 or 5 days, that he was going to go to Washington. Not many teams really valued him as a starting point guard around the league. He wanted Minnesota, Brooklyn, Washington. Those were his teams. Obviously, with Brooklyn rebuilding, Minnesota didn't probably want to take him on due to the defensive liabilities, and then obviously the biggest elephant in the room, they gotta consider paying him an extension because that's what he's going to want. Washington has former Hawks GM Travis Schlenk in their front office, and he's high on Trey Young, so they are taking a chance on him. It's remained to be seen when Trey will play, just because if Washington falls out of the top eight, New York gets their pick this year, so obviously they don't want to do too well. You do want to integrate Trey in a little bit and see how he does. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if he does not play that much the remainder of the year, and then they retool for next year. But the trade was CJ McCollum and Corey Kispert going to the Atlanta Hawks, and then Trey Young going to the Washington Wizards. No picks involved. I'll go through it a little more as we get to them in the ratings update. But why you're here is because of the player ratings update. There was actually 3 weeks in between the last update and this one. This is update number 5 for the year for 2K. For those also that don't know, Christmas and New Year's, they take that 2-week break off for the holiday break, because essentially when they return from that break, there's still people working on 2K26, but most hands have already moved on to 2K27, and now the remainder of the staff is pretty much geared up towards working on 2K27 as well. So outside of next month's college player team update for my team, I would not expect a lot of content to go into 2K. I don't even know if we're going to get a retro update. Normally it would have been out already. I'm holding out hope that it'll be sometime before February that we can get an additional retro update, and hopefully we can get a patch update for the two-way contracts and the free agent pool contract players, but nothing has been seen yet on that front. But let's jump into the ratings changes. Lots to go through. As I said, 3 weeks worth of changes here. So first up, Philadelphia 76ers, Tyrese Maxey +1 to a 93 overall. VJ Edgecombe +1 to an 82 overall. Paul George drops -2 to an 81 overall. They moved him to power forward. I guess that was anticipated with Kelly Oubre returning to the lineup, but so far Oubre's been coming off the bench. But do keep in mind, Trendon Watford barely played last game. And then Dominic Barlow, if he's not converted to a standard contract, is going to run out of games on that two-way contract. So right now he's starting at the 4, and then Paul George is starting at the 3, but that may change. We'll see moving forward. Quentin Grimes, -1 to a 79 overall. Andre Drummond hasn't played that great as of late, -1 to a 78. Dominic Barlow +1 to a 77. As I mentioned, he's a starter right now. +1 for Adem Bona, to a 75. -1 for Jared McCain to a 74. Just the magic of last season is just not there. Coming back from injury and then a completely different team. He hasn't looked like he did last season. And then last but not least, Justin Edwards goes -1 to a 74. Same for him. Very sporadic this year. Going over to the Milwaukee Bucks, we've got some changes for them. We have Kevin Porter Jr. switched to point guard, while Ryan Rollins is actually the 2 guard. With Ryan Rollins, they actually increased him +1 to an 82 overall. Bobby Portis Jr. +1 to an 81. Kyle Kuzma -1 to a 79. AJ Green -1 to a 76. Likewise for Cole Anthony -1 to a 76. And then also -1 for Gary Trent Jr. to a 75. They moved Gary Harris back to small forward, and they also moved Andre Jackson Jr. to small forward. I don't know how long Andre Jackson Jr. is going to be on the roster, because I could see him and Kuzma getting moved by the deadline. Chicago Bulls, Josh Giddey is out with an injury right now, but he did go +1 in the update to an 85. Nikola Vucevic +1 to an 83. Kobe White -1 to an 82. Midas Bazelis +1 to an 81. Then we have Ayu Dosunmu switching to small forward. He goes +1 to a 79. Isaac Okoro +1 to a 77. Zach Collins goes +1 to a 77. And then Kevin Huerter is moved to shooting guard. Last but not least, Patrick Williams goes -1 to a 75. And then they moved Emmanuel Miller to small forward. And then Lachlan Olbrich to backup center. And then Yuki Kawamura has signed a 2-way contract again with the Chicago Bulls. Trenton Flowers was waived. Going over to the Cleveland Cavaliers, Donovan Mitchell +1 to a 95, -1 for Evan Mobley to an 87. Darius Garland is getting back to regular form, +2 for him to an 83. -1 for Jalen Tyson and DeAndre Hunter, both to a 79. Sam Merrill +1 to a 77. Craig Porter Jr. has overtaken the backup point guard spot from Lonzo. He goes +1 in the update. Thomas Bryant goes +2 to a 75. And then Lonzo actually drops -1 to a 74. I would not be shocked to see him traded at the deadline as well. Moving over to the Boston Celtics, much needed update for Jaylen Brown, +2 for him to a 95 overall. Derek White goes +1 to an 85. Anthony Simons +1 to an 80. Jordan Walsh drops -1 to a 78. Luka Garza +1 to a 77. Sam Hauser goes +2 to a 76. He's actually been starting at the 4. And then Josh Minot goes -1 to a 75. He is out of the rotation. And then Hugo Gonzalez has been playing really well. He goes +2 to a 75. Moving over to the Clippers, another update that was much needed. Kawhi Leonard goes +2 to a 74. He has just been on fire lately. So have the Clippers. Ivica Zubac, however, goes -1 to an 85. Zach Collins +2 to a 79. Chris Dunn +1 to a 78. Brook Lopez +2 to a 76. Nick Batum +1 to a 75. Bogdan Bogdanovic is -1 to a 74. He's been not great this season. Kobe Sanders gets a bump +2 to a 74. Chris Paul gets added back to the roster, rightfully so, as he was never waived. So I was kind of confused why 2K had him in the free agent pool to begin with, but that's okay. Yannick Coden Niederhauser, +3 to a 72. He was playing some good minutes for them prior to Zubac coming back. Going over to the Grizzlies, Ja Morant is now the top Grizzly on the team, +1 to an 87 overall. We have Jalen Wells going +1 to an 78. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope +1 to a 76. And then G.G. Jackson +2 to a 75 with a position change to small forward as well. Moving over to the Atlanta Hawks, as I mentioned, they get C.J. McCollum in the trade. I'm going to go ahead and knock him out really quick. +1 for him to an 82. We get the now star of the team, Jalen Johnson, +1 to an 89. Be really curious to see if they move Porzingis and Luke Kennard plus, maybe Ricochet, I assume, for Anthony Davis. We'll see if that comes to fruition. Nikhil Alexander-Walker, +2 for him to an 83. And his position moves to point guard. We have Dyson Daniels still at shooting guard. So it's interesting because they had Nikhil Alexander-Walker at 2 guard, and obviously him playing point guard. It's going to be between him and McCollum. Like, McCollum hasn't come off the bench since like 2015, I think. And then obviously Nikhil Alexander-Walker is more familiar with a bench role, but he's been on fire with this team. I just wonder how that's going to work out. We'll see. Last but not least, Corey Kispert goes -1 to a 77 overall. So once Ricochet essentially is moved, then that makes things kind of interesting because Anthony Davis essentially would slide in, I assume, at center. And then you've got Creasy and Kispert at small forward. So I don't know if they've got anything else planned with maybe a Kongwu and Davis as the double bigs, and then Jalen Johnson would shift down. We'll see what happens if that trade even happens. Miami Heat. Bam Adebayo goes -1 to an 87. Khalil Ware goes +2 to an 82. Andrew Wiggins and Jaime Jaquez both go +1 to an 81 overall. Pelle Larson goes +2 to a 77. Nikola Jovic goes +1 to a 76. Simone Fontecchio drops -1 to a 75. And then we get Kasparis Yakashonis +2 to a 73 overall. He's actually been in the rotation quite a bit. And if you look at the positions, I guess they're anticipating Hero going back to the starting lineup at some point, and then everybody's shifting back up. But right now, the starting lineup is Bam at the 4, Powell at the 2, Hero's coming off the bench, Wiggins at the 3. So we'll see what happens with that. And Yakashonis is actually playing combo guard for them. So we'll see. Charlotte Hornets, Con Knipple, +1 to a 85 overall. He's climbing up there. Brandon Miller goes +3 to a 84 overall. He has been on fire lately. Still don't like his shot selection, but it is what it is. Takes a lot of bad shots. Musa Diabate, +1 to a 78. He's actually been really good for them as a starting center. Kalkbrenner has been out with the elbow injury for a little while. Still no injury designation for him in 2K, but that's no surprise there. +1 for Josh Green to a 74. And then newly signed PJ Hall gets a big boost, +4 to a 72 overall. He is starting whenever Musa Diabate is out. So obviously with Plumlee out 6 weeks with a groin surgery, PJ Hall is what they have. Going over to the Utah Jazz, big mover for Keontae George. He actually goes up +2. Let me double check that really quickly. So I have in my notes +3. Actually, yes, he did go +3. So I did have that right. So +3 for Keontae George to an 86 overall. Yusuf Nurkic +2 to a 79. Ace Bailey and Isaiah Collier both go to 78, +1 for Bailey, +2 for Collier. No bump for Bryce Sensabaugh, who's been starting. Shpi Mikhailuk has actually been the starting 3 for them, or I guess you could look at him as starting 2, and then Sensabaugh's the 3. Either way you want to look at it. He goes +1, Mikhailuk does. -1 for Kyle Filipowski. Kevin Love goes +1 to a 76. And that is your Utah Jazz changes. Moving over to the Sacramento Kings, DeMar DeRozan gets a bump +1 to an 84. Maxime Reynaud goes +2 to a 79. Dennis Schroeder +1 to a 78. Keegan Murray goes -1 to a 79. Malik Monk drops -2 to a 77. Keon Ellis +1 to a 76. -1 for Precious Achiuwa to a 76. And then Nick Clifford climbs +3 to a 75. And last but not least, Dylan Cardwell had gotten some good minutes for them prior to Drew Eubanks coming back. He is a +3, 71 overall. New York Knicks, Tosin Evbawa gets waived, I think Dink Pate might end up getting the two-way contract spot for them. We will see what happens, but keep an eye on that. Ratings changes for them. Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby go -1 each to an 85. Mitchell Robinson climbs back up +1 to a 79. Jordan Clarkson and Miles McBride both go to a 78. Position change for McBride to shooting guard as well. Tyler Kolek +1 to a 76. Mohamed Diawara goes +5 to a 73. And then, last but not least, Kevin McCullough Jr. goes +2 to a 71. I really think that McCullough had gotten a scan at the 2024 Summer League or 25. I can't remember which year he got a scan. If anybody that's watching this has the post from Pixel Gun Studios or the Knicks that show him getting scanned, let me know, because I want to try to get that over to 2K to let them know that, that is a scan that gets missed, because the art team sometimes, especially if you notice with the notes for the patches, they forget a lot of stuff, or they, just totally miss something. And so obviously if those IDs aren't sent over to the roster team, they don't know what to update, because obviously, not talking to each other consistently, there can be some lapse in content being added or removed. So, if you see that post, I can't find it. I looked on X to see if I could find that Knicks post of McCullough getting scanned. It was McCullough and a couple other players in the same post, and so, I'd love to be able to send that off. So let me know. The LA Lakers, DeAndre Ayton goes -2 to an 81. He's just not been the center for them. Marcus Smart -2 to a 77. +1 for Jake LaRavia to a 77. And then Dalton Connect goes -1 to a 75 overall. We do get Bronny James moving to point guard in this update. Orlando Magic, we get Anthony Black +2 to an 82 for him. They kept him at point guard, obviously, because Suggs is out for an undetermined amount of time. We will see. He's got a sprained MCL, or bruised MCL, I should say. Jace Richardson has taken advantage of his minutes, +3 to a 75 overall. Somehow they still have Jet Howard at a 75. I don't know what they're doing. Noah Penda +1 to a 75. Howard does get a position change to shooting guard, but he should be way further down. He had one little small stretch of like 2 or 3 games, and that was it. Like, that's all he's really done in his career. Tyus Jones +1 to a 74 as well. Moving over to the Dallas Mavericks. Now I'm a little bit confused on this one. I took, obviously, a look at the update ahead of time. They moved positions. Like, I don't mind seeing Anthony Davis move to power forward, but then you moved both Marshall and PJ Washington to small forward behind Cooper Flagg in the anticipation that Cooper Flagg is playing point guard. And I get that. That's technically how it is, but I don't think that that's going to be a long-term thing. I think Anthony Davis would essentially get traded, and then you're going to have to move PJ Washington and Marshall back up to the 4, or Flagg moves to the 4 or something. Like, it's just confusing why they did both of them move to small forward. A little head scratcher there, but Cooper Flagg does get a +1 to an 85 overall. Brandon Williams +1 to a 78. Max Christie +1 to a 78 as well. Ryan Nembhard has cooled off a little bit, -1 for him to a 77. D'Angelo Russell moves back to point guard. Jaden Hardy moves back to shooting guard, +1 for him to 74 overall. Moving over to the Brooklyn Nets, Nick Claxton goes +1 to an 82. Yegor Doman, excuse me. Doman, he goes to a 77 +1. Day'Ron Sharpe goes +2 to a 77. +1 for Zaire Williams to a 76. -1 For both Terrence Mann and Danny Wolf to a 75. Tyrese Martin, -1 to a 73. And then Drake Powell has cooled way off. He goes -2 to a 72 overall. Moving over to the Denver Nuggets, we get Tim Hardaway Jr. +1 for him to an 81 overall. It's interesting what the Nuggets have been able to do with the Jokic injury, and then obviously Cam Johnson is out, and some other guys, and it's just amazing to see what they've been doing since. But it is what it is with the injuries, and it's just the next man up. Peyton Watson goes +1 to a 79. He also gets changed to small forward. We get Bruce Brown Jr. to a 76 overall, +1 for him. Spencer Jones, a big mover for them, +3 to a 76 as well. Deron Holmes, +2 to a 73. Zeke Nnaji, +1 to a 73. And then last but not least, Jalen Pickett, +2 to a 73. Like I said, those guys all have been stepping up in the minutes since Jokic has been out and other injuries as well. We go over to the Indiana Pacers. We get TJ McCollum, +1 back to an 80 overall. They've lost Ben Mathurin, but Mathurin likely is probably traded at the deadline. We'll see. Jarris Walker, -1 to a 75. And Mathurin gets traded because they don't want to pay him an extension. So Quentin Jackson gets moved to shooting guard. Micah Potter has been starting games for them. He goes +4 to a 74 overall. He's a stretch 5. We get Johnny Furphy, who's been starting at the 3 with Mathurin out, so he goes +3 to a 73. Ethan Thompson goes +1 to a 73. And then we get Taylen Peter moved to point guard as well. We go over to the New Orleans Pelicans. Zion Williamson, +1 for him to an 88. Zion's back in the news, but not for his play. Of course, it is what it is. But if you guys Google Zion, you'll see what I'm talking about. But Derek Queen has cooled off a little bit, -1 for him to an 81. Surprise, no update for Trey Murphy, considering he had 42 the other night. But it is what it is. We get Jeremiah Fears dropping off a little bit. He goes -2 to a 78. Jose Alvarado goes -1 to a 76. Not sure about that one. Carlo Matkovic goes to backup power forward. We get no movement again. DeAndre Jordan still a 74. But meanwhile, they drop -2 Bryce McGowan's, who's in the rotation. Make it make sense. But it is what it is. At least drop DeAndre Jordan to the same overall. But it's okay. Cade Cunningham, +1 for him to a 94 overall. -1 for Asar Thompson to an 82. Isaiah Stewart's been starting for the injured Jalen Duren. He goes +1 to an 80. I think he might be able to even go up a little more. He's been, I think he was Defensive Player of the Month or the week. I can't remember which one. Karis LeVert has really not been great for them. He goes -1 to a 77. Ron Holland boosts back up +1 to a 76. Marcus Sasser goes +1 to a 75. And then we go over to the Toronto Raptors. Emmanuel Quickley, -1 to an 81. Sandro Mamakhalashvili, +1 to a 78. Jacoby Walter, +1 to a 75. Ochai Agbaji goes +2 to a 75. And then Jalen Battle drops -1 to a 73. Position change for him to power forward. Moving over to the Houston Rockets, we get a position change for Tari Eason to shooting guard. He is a +1 to an 81 overall. Likewise, +1 for Jabari Smith to an 81. We get Steven Adams, -1 to a 77. Dorian Finney-Smith, -1 to a 76. Josh Okogie, -1 to a 75. And then Aaron Holiday, -1 to a 74. Moving over to the San Antonio Spurs, they've cooled off a little bit. They had lost 2, then I think they won their last game. Stephon Castle, -1 to an 85. We get Harrison Barnes, -1 to a 78. You ever notice if Harrison Barnes, doesn't do as great, they instantly drop him? It's just interesting. Keldon Johnson does go +1 to an 80 overall. Julian Champagny goes +1 to a 78. And if you pay attention, they actually updated his defense, considering I believe his defensive consistency, and I'm not looking at the original roster. I believe he went up +30 in defensive consistency because I think he had a 40, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm wrong on that one, but I'm pretty sure he went up quite a bit in defensive ratings. Kelly Olynyk, -1 to a 76 overall for him. Moving over to the Phoenix Suns, they moved Devin Booker back to point guard. They did not move Dylan Brooks back to small forward. That's just weird to me that they're implementing this lineup still when Brooks is clearly the 3, and then Allen has been coming off the bench. I guess. I mean, you could have left Allen at the 3, but at least move Brooks back to the 3 because it's been Ryan Dunn and Royce O'Neal at the 4. But it is what it is, I guess. Speaking of Ryan Dunn, he actually goes -1 to a 75. I don't know what the hell 2K is doing. No change for Jordan Goodwin. I thought he could at least got a bump +1. We get Jamari Boye going +1 to a 74. He's been the backup point guard. And then Nick Richards goes -1 to a 73. Rasheer Fleming +1 to a 71. OKC Thunder, they have been looking a little shaky lately. We get a drop for Jalen Williams, finally, -2 for him to an 88. I think he could probably drop down a little bit further. He's just not had the same consistency. Obviously, coming back from a major wrist injury, he's not completely healthy. Chet Holmgren goes -1 to an 88. Lou Dort and Alex Caruso both -1 to a 79. Jason Wallace -179 as well. And then Aaron Wiggins -1 to a 78 overall. So some drops for them. We go over to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Anthony Edwards gets a bump for the Minnesota Timberwolves. So looking at him, he's a +1 to a 96 overall. Julius Randle gets a drop -1 to an 87, and then we get a drop for Jaden McDaniels to an 82 overall. We move over to the Portland Trailblazers. Well-deserved +1 bump for Denny Abia. I think he may even, him and Jalen Johnson could really get to the 90 overall club. Really soon, I think. Shaden Sharp +1 to an 84. Donovan Clingan has been really good this year, +1 to an 83. And then all the way down, +1 or +2 for Caleb Love to a 74 overall. He's been playing really good. Don't be shocked if they somehow move Ryan Rupert and then they end up converting Love, but we'll see. Maybe not. Golden State Warriors position change for Brandon Podziemski back to point guard. Jonathan Kuminga gets a drop -2 to a 77, -1 for Quentin Post to a 76. Moses Moody gets a position change to shooting guard, and he drops -2. Somehow they've left Pat Spencer at a 76, despite him not really being in the rotation very much. D'Anthony Melton gets a +1 bump to a 75, and that's your Warriors updates. Last but not least, Trey Young, as I mentioned, is now on the Washington Wizards. I just don't see him playing as much. They're going to be cautious with their draft range, and they're also going to be cautious with Trey because he's had a couple injuries this year, and they don't want him to get, seriously hurt ahead of next year. Alex Sarr, -1 to an -1 to an 83 overall. Then we get Bilal Coulibaly, +2 to a 79 overall. I think their position change, they could flip-flop George and Coulibaly, in my opinion, because Coulibaly could play the 3 more so, especially with the 7'2 wingspan. And then Kaishan George could essentially play the 2. Or if you want to go really small, and I doubt they do this, but they could do George as a 4, even though he's not a 4. They did do it last year, so that could be a possibility if Middleton's moved. Although I'll mention in a second, some other things. Marvin Bagley goes +1 to a 78. Trey Johnson goes +2 to a 78. I actually think Trey Johnson is going to be their long-term starting 2. I know he fits more of a 6-man, but I think they want to put him in as a 2. And then Koulibaly, obviously, like I said, would move up to the 3, and then Kaishan George to the 4. And then you could be backed up by Justin Champagnie, who is a +1 in this update, by the way, to a 77. And then Bub Carrington, also +1 to a 77. He would be the backup point guard. It's fluid right now, like I said, because we don't know when Trey is going to make his debut and if he even plays a lot this year. I could be totally wrong, and he plays the rest of the season and go from there. I mean, it just depends what's going to happen at the deadline for them. I mean, I could definitely see Middleton moved, and I could see someone like a Malachi Branham or A.J. Johnson moved as well. You can maybe even see Cam Whitmore moved in the right deal also. But make sure you hit the thumbs up button if you haven't already. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Not a lot of content coming out right now for the official rosters, and with the bugs to the two-way contracts and then the tendencies being flawed that I mentioned last video, it's just not been worth it to do a lot of custom roster content this year. For custom roster content, make sure you're going to check out Real 2K Rosters. The Real 2K Insider has been killing it. Like literally every day he's got an update highlighting the NBA games and just kind of how it affects 2K. And so you can get a real live look at what changes are being made by him and just kind of what content could look like moving forward, things like that. He also will go over the badge changes, which I did not do in this one because he keeps track of all that data. But John does a great job of breaking everything down. What I'd like to see maybe in the future, and what I may end up doing, is tweaking some of the tendencies. The tendencies haven't been changed in about 2 years. I know the reason why. I'm not going to publicly say because it's not my place to, but the person that was doing the tendencies did a good job with it. Like there was no issue, but just some other things came into place. So not going to say anything more, but those tendencies haven't been updated. So you go over to teams like the Atlanta Hawks and you've got Jalen Johnson like at a 50 like this is ridiculous. Like this has got to be updated. And I don't know if 2K is going to do it or not. Like, I mean, it needs to be done. So hopefully I might be able to highlight it. It won't be till after All-Star if I can that following week, but we will see what happens with that. Maybe 2K will surprise us and put an actual update out, but I doubt it. We'll see. But thanks everybody for watching. Like I said, make sure you hit the thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe. If you feel like donating, donations are always welcome. My PayPal link will be in the description. Every little bit helps. Appreciate all the support from everyone lately. So hope you enjoyed the video. Stay safe and take care.